and welcome to Insight. I'm Natasha Chaupaskar. The latest national survey by Pew Research Center, an American think tank, has showed that only 39% of Americans believe that Trump is doing a good job, a lower number than any modern administration at the end of its first month. In 4 confused weeks, Trump has seen his national security advisor ousted, a cabinet nominee withdraw, a centerpiece immigration policy fail in the courts, and a tidal wave of damaging leaks. Still, in his first solo news conference, President Donald Trump insisted there was zero chaos in his crisis-buffeted White House and railed against enemies in the media, politics, and the courts. He said he inherited a mess, both at home and abroad, and claimed that his administration was running like a fine-tuned machine. To Dean of Jindal School of International Affairs, Professor Sreeram Chaulia. Thanks very much, Professor Chaulia, for joining us here. Professor Chaulia, Republican Senator John McCain spoke at the Munich Security Conference 2017, where he categorically said that that Donald Trump's team is in disarray. And if I quote, he said, "I think that the Flynn issue obviously is something that shows that in many respects this administration is in disarray and they have got a lot of work to do." So even the Republicans are not together. And of course, we know about McCain. He has been a strong critic of Donald Trump. But overall, what sort of assessment, 1 month as U.S. president, how well he has performed?
Well, yeah, I mean, being an insurgent, he's been always trying to challenge all the established institutions, and therefore there is this sense of an internal war. Some have talked about the deep state bureaucracy and the pundits and the Washington elites and how they will stymie him at every step and pull him back. So I think the highlight, really, the most jarring highlight of this dysfunctional 1 month has been the firing of the so-called resignation, but actually he was asked to leave, of Michael Flynn, the National Security Advisor. 24 days. This is a record in US history. Minimum term that any NSA has served is over 2 years.
Okay.
So that just showed how much this internecine battle is going to, consume this presidency. He has not been able to appoint many people to key positions. They're like, by one count, 700 of them still up for grabs, and he's not nominating because he cannot trust anyone. And the old Republican elite do not see eye to eye with him. So, this policy wonks, Washington is full of them. And many of them are storied, like people who have done work for 2 or 3 Republican presidents, willing to work for him, but he doesn't want them because he doesn't trust them, or because they said bad things about him during the election. So in a way, he has not moved forward from the partisan politics and the hustle and bustle of the campaign into governing. And as a disruptive candidate, as a disruptor in chief, I think he's going to try and keep on doing this, because he's rallying his base by showing that, all these are, you mentioned the so-called enemies that he's now set up. So in this way, he's, I think, going to use his populist right-wing credentials and say, look, the entire system is against me, but I'm with you, and we are going to bring some kind of a revolutionary change.
He's playing this victim card against, the larger institutions who are not really. Something like this only happened during the campaign time also, when he was basically giving an idea that more or less it's the media which is against him. Not everyone is in favor of him, and that actually gave him this level of attention, from the way he actually came to power.
Yeah, his very style, his personality is also very maverick, and the flip-flops you mentioned. On China, first he said one China policy is up for negotiation, then he backtracked. Similarly, on the Iran deal, he said we're going to scrap it the moment I'm in, but now it looks like they're going to keep the Iran nuclear deal. Lots of other ups and his questioning of the two-state solution for Palestine and Israel, all these are seen as, and then, what is happening is his own aides and his cabinet members are then going out to pacify people, saying, no, we are still on track, we're going to continue. So for Trump, it's almost like a dual track. Whatever the president says, what is the credibility of it? I mean, the Europeans are, scared because they think that he is out to get them. But on the other hand, his emissaries, high-level people who go to European capitals and meet European leaders, are in a reassurance
And we have seen this series of meetings of assurances and reassurances, be it Mike Pence or be it even,
But whose word to take? I mean, they're looking at Trump tweeting an angry man, and he's saying all kinds of things. And on the other hand, Mattis and all these somewhat more suave right-wing Republicans are out there to try and assuage people.
Right, so, but what do you really make of the first solo news conference of Donald Trump, and simultaneously also of this particular survey, the Pew Research Center, which has said that just 39% people actually believe in his presidency at this point. So what you really, is it really an astonishing figure for someone who actually gave such a sweeping election result?
Well, the polls, unfortunately, as you know, even during the election, they misled us. So their credibility is also low. So I wouldn't go too far into the polls right now. But yes, I mean, he's a divisive president. There's no question about it. And half of the, or more than 50% of the country didn't vote for him. So therefore, I mean, they will, the resistance camp, as it's been called now, is pretty widespread, and they will continue to try and block anything he wants to do. And I think what is at fundamental stake here is what is the ethos of United States, what is its identity,
right.
And at that level Trump is trying to redefine it. Even national interest, because the traditional Republicans say Russia is our inveterate enemy,
right.
and he's saying I want to think fresh about it. So I think there is like he's
so
trying
there is a strong departure from the previous approach towards foreign policy, and as far as foreign policy is concerned, we've always said that
he's definitely not a traditional Republican.
Not a traditional
He's what
Republican.
I call a radical conservative or a grassroots populist conservative, and I think he's going to find it very uphill, because America is a kind of a established, mature state with an entrenched bureaucracy and a whole apparatus, and they're going to try and block it.
Most importantly, Professor Chaulia, it's important to also realize if he'll actually learn any lessons post, the departure of Mr. Flynn, as far as appointments are concerned, because let's not forget Mr. Flynn, who was also fired by President Barack Obama in 2014 as head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, so was particularly unpopular in Washington. Also, his other picks, be it Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who faces allegations of racism, or Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, who also needed the Vice President to cast a tie-breaking vote in the Senate for confirmation. Do you really know enough about Trump's core beliefs? Because it's very difficult as of now, following him since the campaign days, there has been a series of flip-flops and trying to fine-tune the policy as and when the way people react. Will it really work when you are the president, when you have to work on hardcore policies? And as far as dealing with countries are concerned, you mentioned Russia, China, pivot to Asia, this whole approach towards terror, Islam, radical Islam. How far president can really go ahead with these flip-flops?
Well, he certainly doesn't have a coherent grand strategy, and his team is not showing that. They are all over the place, and there are a lot of contradictions within contradictions. But if you ask me, he does have a worldview, and it comes from the far right in the US, or the alt-right movement as it's called. And it's pretty clear, it's racist, it's based on religious bigotry, and it's also based on protectionism in economic policies. It's based on a general sense of bringing back white supremacy in some form or the other. And globally, it's also about what we call transactionalism. That is the idea that America has been cheated by everyone, and that we somehow have to be better at deal making and on one-on-ones.
Right.
Multilateral institutions, the basis for the global order, which America has traditionally championed and upheld, those he doesn't have at all, as you said. And in fact, Nikki Haley, I really pity her, because she's a fine candidate for ambassador to the UN, but she's actually going to be under a lot of pressure, because, as you said, there's a lot of skepticism about the UN or all these global institutions, because they are seen to be taking power away from national governments, and that is the ideology of Trump. The far right in the US believes that there have always been this reactionary element in the US that thought that the UN is a whole conspiracy to somehow rob the US of its sovereignty and of its vitality and ability to act on its own. So I think if you put all these together, what you have is actually the factual inaccuracies, and those things are all in a way also part of the idea that we are anti-intellectual.
But even Professor Chaulia, if you believe greater in centralized power structure instead of decentralized and taking one responsibility for everything, it also asks for greater accountability and greater clarity in approach towards policy. Does that really exist with President Trump at this point? Even
I'm not seeing it. For example, Usually they have every presidency comes out with a national security strategy and all that. We'll have to wait and see for that whenever it comes out. I think they'll eventually have to get their act together, because after all the screening and so on is done, eventually all these positions will be filled, the high-level secretaries and all of them. So once that happens, they will come up with some kind of an agenda for the next 4 years. But right now what you're seeing is a kind of disjointed stuff where I think his personality is the key issue, because he, believes in only loyalty, and those who are loyal to him, those who did not slur him during the campaigns, other than them, nobody else is an expert. And actually he's anti-expert and anti-intellectual.
That's he's part of the ideology. Anti-intellectual.
And that's what is causing the confusion.
Professor Chaulia, what is it that surprises you the most in Trump's presidency in last 1 month? I'm sure you followed many US presidents, but what is it that is so different from the previous presidents?
Well, abdication of the traditional role of a great power, because great powers are generous. They don't count, do penny pinching, and they don't talk about, you better pay up or else we will not support you. America's built this whole alliance structure around the world, and Trump is not very keen on, continuing those. I mean, I think the key is Stephen K. Bannon and the people around him. They are not just non-politicians, but also people who have never dealt with policy making at this stage. They've been all these fringe elements who have now suddenly come into the mainstream and are in power. So I think the biggest surprise is, it's like the outsiders have taken over, and obviously there's going to be a huge shake-up. So I think America's role in the world, I think for me, I thought that he would moderate some of his positions on some of these, but he continues to gun for many of these traditional positions. So in a way what we are seeing is it's like a redefinition of, as I said, of what America is in the world.
Do you also think, Professor Chaulia, that he is strong enough or courageous enough to say that, okay, fine, in my fight against terror, I'm going to stop all US's aid to Pakistan, and but I also need Pakistan to fight in Afghanistan. So that's sort of a challenge that exists for United States. Where do you see the security aspect and what this really means for US ties with India?
Yeah, no, I do expect that the screws will be tightened on US aid to Pakistan, because one side, there are people lobbying for it in the traditional Republican camp, because they've always been closer to the military establishment in Islamabad. But Trump, as we've spoken, is not in that category at all. And I think it's very clear that during the campaign as well, he had alleged that Obama and Hillary Clinton created ISIS, and by which he meant that they allowed this monster to emerge, in the sense that because of the US alliance system in the region, they permitted Saudi and Qatar and Kuwait and Turkey and all these countries to go ahead and nurture this Frankenstein. So I think now he has a sharper sense of who is, and it's a very black and white kind of world. It's very simple, as I said, inelegant and simple. The Obama style sophistication and thinking about pros and cons. If he's either with some, if he basically decides that this one is a bad dude or a bad. So
he's an extremist. There are no gray areas. On one side, either it is yes or a no.
So I don't think you will see a lot of nuances. If there are terrorist attacks coming out of Pakistan and the jihadist, outflow, which is endangering the region and the world, I think he's going to call a spade and also apply greater pressure. That's what I see, because if he again goes back to saying, we will balance this interest against that interest, that is more like traditional foreign policy making. This guy is an insurgent, and he's going to say, I don't like these bad guys.
And that has been the approach of many of these countries who say that as far as we are together on the fight against terror, but our approach towards a particular country is largely driven by our national interest, and that we have seen also in the case of China, and even in the case of the United States so far, be it condemning attacks in Uri, Pathankot, all the countries have come together, but when it comes to taking action against Masood Azhar, we have seen that how, the vote has been always blocked out by China in the United Nations. So there are challenges, and so this sort of an approach, are we going to see a shift there, and is this a good thing for India as far as our fight against terror is concerned?
I think once the house is in order in Washington, hopefully sometime soon, and once they have a permanent national security advisor, there's going to be a lot happening at the levels between Mr. Doval and his counterpart. And I think we're going to see, for example, not just more intelligence sharing and defense cooperation. I think there's no way that is going to be dialed back. Whatever Obama did, I expect that Trump will do even more of it, because he's, although he's not a militarist like a traditional Republican who believes in projecting military power around the world, at the same time, as we said, he's got this whole anti-terrorism agenda.
Right.
So I think there's going to be a lot more cooperation. And I wouldn't even be surprised if, if we do surgical strikes and so on in the future, that there's going to be, a lot more coordination with the US military on these kind of issues.
Okay.
Because we used to be uncomfortable about bringing in the US into Kashmir and all that some time ago.
Right.
But increasingly, president after president, George W. Bush, then Obama, even Clinton, from starting from that period, increasingly they're favoring us. So I think that momentum is not going to be stopped. He may be challenging some core US positions in other parts of the world, but the fact that India is off his radar,
Okay.
and is not one of his targeted lists either on Twitter or in his, vitriolic statements, is good news, because it means
So
that
far so good for India.
it means that we're going to go. It's going to be largely smooth sailing.
Okay, Professor Chaulia, H-1B visas, because that's where the basic fear is that if the number of IT sector jobs will go down, and what this really means for our companies. Of course, this will also mean cost hike for American customers. But how do you see that sort of an understanding as of now? Because on one side, you really have to bring in jobs for your own citizens, and he's repeatedly said Americans first, more jobs. Unemployment is a huge challenge there. On the other side, H-1B visas.
Yeah, no, his protectionist agenda, both on migration and on trade, will impact India-US relations. I mean, these are, you can argue that they're strategic, but if we just keep aside the military and defense, there are reasons for worry, in the sense that, as Professor Mahapatra was saying, there is a contradiction between the Make in India and Make in America. And we want to attract more and more capital. If you look at the Chinese growth model from the 1980s, it was largely fueled by Western, especially American capital,
Right.
that flew in trillions over years and helped create those huge manufacturing bases in the Pearl River Delta and so on. So if we have to make in India, and which is one of our core national interests, it will, of course, cost potentially some of the capital that was earmarked for us, or we would have likely to have attracted, may not come back to us now, because Trump is using unconventional means to threaten US corporations. And so it's no longer a free market capitalist society where corporate houses can make their own decisions. Some of them are falling in line behind Trump,
Okay.
to show their loyalty to the US interests, so to say.
Okay.
So I think this will be a hurdle, but I think the strategy for us is simple: be it our software exporters or our technical professionals, diversify. 2008, 2009, US economy tanked, and there wasn't enough opportunity for our exporters. Even then,
Right.
we looked for other opportunities: South-South cooperation, Africa, the rest of Asia, integration, getting into regional pacts and agreements. This is the need of the hour for us.
Diversify and look
Yeah.
for new options.
Yeah.
Final comments on the program. A final word from you. Areas where India and US can really align their interests.
Well, we need to get Masood Azhar and people like him, preferably in jail, if not assassinated. I mean, we have run out of patience. And secondly, I think there's got to be some restoration of, if not the pivot to Asia kind of thing, but some kind of a rethinking about the US role in Asia, which has got some kind of strategic consequences. Right now, it's all transactional, and that's the deficiency of the Trump outlook. It's all one-on-one. He's not thinking about it as a system. And for that, I think he needs advisors. He has shown in some foreign policy cases that he has backtracked from his earlier kind of very offbeat positions,
Right.
and has come to the center. So maybe that's eventually going to come through. And so India, United States have to work on maintaining stability in Asia and beyond. And I think even if he doesn't have a larger global strategy, even if we just look at the bilateral relationship with over 100 billion, we should be protecting it, and not just protecting it, but quadrupling or quintupling it. The potential is there for two-way trade in goods and services.
Okay,
But with protectionism, there is a threat. So I think we've got to really, really work hard on commercial relations.
So we have to give him a chance. Okay, just 1 month in office, and thank you all of you for joining us in this program.